New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
What if the person you think you are is just a fraction of who you truly are? What if years of conditioning and surviving in a challenging world have left you clinging to strategies and beliefs that mask your truest nature? I'm Catherine Duca, psychotherapist and self-esteem coach, and you're listening to Who Do You Think You Are? A show that looks beneath our psychological masks and uncovers our profoundly messy, beautiful, brilliant, tender-hearted essence. Join me as we go in search of the hidden power of our true selves. I'm so glad you're here. And you know that to be true. I am so glad to be with you this Sunday evening. Welcome, welcome to Who Do You Think You Are? This is a podcast dedicated to you, to your voice, your authenticity, your truth. On this show, we talk about ways that you can empower yourself, have the highest regard for your well-being, live from a place of genuine self-respect and self-love, and make yourself a priority in your own life. Meet me here each week for curated tips and strategies designed to help you drop your psychological masks, connect with your truest essence, and simply live life more easily. Why? Because we know that when we approach life in this way, we naturally and effortlessly and, yes, organically have more room, more generosity, and more love for one another. And, dear listeners, wide receivers, when have we needed love more than this very day? I'm so glad we're together. As you know, we are live, and those of you who have access to the chat and are with me tonight, I invite you to interact with me. Know that you can ask a question, leave a comment, share your point of view. Any and all are welcome on this show, provided they fall within the scope of what I can address during this time and in this format. And I want to remind you as well that if you are struggling with something, if you're going through something and you're having difficulty shaking it or working it through, or you're not even sure what the issue is that has you in a grip, but you know that you're not yourself, please don't go it alone. Please call someone, get help. There is plenty of good qualified help available, and it would be a good thing to do, and definitely a self-respect and self-love practice to reach out for that help. If there is anything I could do to help you with that, if you need help with a referral, please let me know. Drop me a line at Catherine@CatherineDuca.com. That's Catherine@CatherineDuca.com. And let me know what you need, and I'll be happy to see what I could do to be helpful. But you know what I say, do not go it alone. Going it alone, mustering up, white knuckling, isolating is not really a badge of strength. Reaching out for help is. So please keep that in mind. And a bit of housekeeping. Please, 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 if you find this content useful tonight, or if you've been listening to the show for some time now and have learned a few things and find usefulness in what we talk about, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe so the algorithm is happy. You all know how that goes, right? When the algorithm is happy, more people have access to the show, and we spread the word so that more and more people can live from self-respect and self-love. Thank you. Thank you in advance. We're going to be together for the next, I don't know, hour, give or take. So please, let's co-create the kind of conversation that will stay with all of us this week. Let's talk about things that we can really sink our teeth in and draw from to be better people and feel better and spread benevolence and kindness and love. Tonight we are going to talk about a topic that actually no one likes to talk about. I don't know if you've seen my reel today, but that's how I started. No one likes to talk about this topic. And so you might ask yourself, well, Kathy, why should I tune into a show and listen to a conversation on a subject matter that I don't want to talk about? And that is a very good question, actually. My answer is because this topic is very, very important and very germane to any good, sustaining, solid relationship. In fact, I think it's part of the backbone of any good relationship. And I'll tell you, it is not love, though it's an aspect of love. And it isn't chemistry, although chemistry matters, of course. And it isn't even compatibility, despite the fact that compatibility is essential for a sustaining and sustainable relationship. No, we're not talking about those things per se. We're talking about the capacity and the willingness and the skills to have hard conversations. Hard conversations. Why is this so important? Well, you know, we can't always walk on sunshine in our relationships, granted, but walking on eggshells, even occasionally, can actually undermine what would otherwise be a good connection. And I've seen so many of my clients, about half my practice is couples. And when couples call me and they come in, oftentimes they are in an eggshell state. Usually it is one person who does the tiptoeing, really tentative, doesn't want to rock the boat, skirts the issues. But really, even though that person is on eggshells, the other person definitely has a role to play. And we're going to be talking about that because our relationships are very much like a dance. I think I talked about this one time. And in some relationships, it's a ballet. And in others, it's kind of that moshing kind of dance. You know how that goes. You just throw somebody in the pit and slam against each other. And I think when conflict arises in our relationships, if we give in to what is often our knee-jerk reaction and we become reactive, that makes things worse. And I'll tell you, I speak from experience because this past weekend, I found myself in a pretty significant, and to be honest, upsetting conflict with a dear friend. And I have to say, I wish I had practiced what I preach a little bit better, maybe even much better. I did not. I lost my place. I got caught up in my knee-jerk reactivity. And what happened was the last thing that I wanted to have happen. My reaction contributed to things not going well, and both of us kind of getting buried under an avalanche of the things that, I would have told myself not to do. Things like, interrupting and blaming and wanting to be right and holding my position. And I tell you, I'm in deep contemplation about it, and I hope the show is helpful to you and to me. So I'm going to listen to myself very carefully and dedicate myself to listening to my own lecture here, if you will. Point being, I think we're all human. We all make missteps, and where possible, I think if we can commit ourselves to sincere and unedited self-examination, I think we can come back from these breaches and these avalanches of negativity. And I really believe we can. So I'm going to be listening to what I say and what you have to say very, very carefully this evening. So tonight's conversation is about conflict. Now, a few weeks ago, I talked about kind of the double helix of difficult conflict, but I talked more about how to have a better difficult conversation. And I touched on conflict. And actually, I have to say, I think I had that backwards. I think I should have talked initially about conflict. Why? Because the reason so many of us struggle with having hard conversations is because of the underlying fear around conflict. So tonight, we're not going to have too many how-tos about how to have the difficult talk. We're going to talk instead about what it's like when we're afraid of conflict, what that does to us, what that does to our innards and our nervous system and our brains, our amygdala, and then as a result, what comes out of our mouth, right? So conflict. Now, most people avoid hard conversations because they find the conflict, the notion of conflict, intolerable. So I want to ask you from the top of at the top of the show here, does that resonate with you? Are you someone who, at the very thought, at the very whiff of conflict, do you shut down? Do you go into fight or flight? Do you go into dread? Do you pounce or withdraw? Many people do, and there are reasons for that. You see, conflict, just the word alone, conflict, has a connotation for many people that brings to mind things like clashing points of view, raised voices, slammed doors. It can be viewed as something that may potentially lead to violence or abuse or volatility or anger or resentment. I mean, these are some of the background things that we may not have even identified, but that kind of come up for us in an energetic way, or we just bristle at the thought of having a hard conversation because we are afraid of the conflict. But it really doesn't have to be this way, at least not all the time. And I think we can reframe conflict. You see, conflict has a very big umbrella, I believe. There are the kinds of conflicts that result in raised voices and cursing and, banging your fist on the table. That's true. But much more often, we can perceive conflict with much more, I would say, minor situations. Some people view the very notion of disagreeing openly with someone as a conflict. They feel that if they assert themselves, if they say no, my goodness, for some people, saying no is practically a declaration of war, right? If I say no, there's going to be a domino effect. This person will be angry with me. This person will judge me. This person will walk away or reject me or push me away or withdraw. A whole host of things that just hinge on perhaps your desire to say no. So that's when people go into people pleasing and the like. So I often say that it's not just the conflict that creates issues between people. It's the way in which we try to handle this conflict. But I think we can reframe it as conflict is simply opposing points of view, kind of the the intersection, if you will, of where my perceptions and opinions meet up with yours, but they don't align. They don't align. So I invite you to consider that for a moment. Conflict can be seen as simply having opposing points of view or an opposing point of view. And it's where my perception of things meets up with your perception. And we have a gridlock. We have a gridlock. We don't align. But how we handle this misalignment has everything to do with whether the conflict itself will escalate or whether it will be diffused. So, for example, in my experience this weekend, when I did my part and went into hyper, and when I say hyper, I mean hyper reactivity, and by the way, I have to say, there's nothing worse than a psychotherapist becoming hyper reactive, because we speak in a certain language that admittedly can be disarming. And I guess the only good news is this other person was a psychotherapist as well. So our love language was a mutual one. But that didn't stop me from becoming extremely animated, shall we say, and using some colorful language. And I have to say that how the conflict, how we attempted to address this conflict was like gasoline on a fire. I'll speak for myself, had I not gone into that mode, I think we could have gotten through the crux of the issue much more easily and much more quickly. But when I piled on my reactions, then that became another layer that we had to work through. Okay? So this is what happens. But instead of that knee jerk, if we can hear, I'll put that in quotes, what is being said beneath what the other person is verbally expressing, if we hear with our inner ear, then we have a chance at communicating on a deeper level and bypassing the very uncomfortable and very tension-filled ping pong match that goes on when we say, no, but I mean, no, but you said that, but I mean this. You can just hear the tone in my voice, right? And so that's what happens. One person knee jerks and the other person ratchets up and it escalates. And then I have to counter that when I lose my ground and I'm no longer grounded. I'm swept away, probably in wanting to be right, probably in wanting to be, I think deeper than that, wanting to be understood. But the way in which I attempted to get myself understood, to make myself heard, really made it actually very difficult for the other person to hear me. So this is the thing. Now, what I want to say about conflict at the same time, along with all of this, is that we really can't differentiate when we never fight. So if you're listening to my example and you're thinking to yourself, well, that's why I don't fight. It's better not to fight. Well, yes and no. It depends on how we fight, and probably a better word than fight is negotiate. How we negotiate and navigate these differences has all to do with whether or how well we're going to get through them. But if we can't fight, we can't differentiate. So, mixing it up, expressing your point of view, even if it differs from the other person's point of view, whether we call that fighting or negotiating, that is actually a way for each person to declare their autonomy. Because if we don't fight, if we don't um, risk any friction, then actually what we're trying to do, I mean, of course, we don't stop and think about this, but we're trying to be one with the other person. Um, being agreeable when we don't feel like agreeing, but playing that role, taking that stance repeatedly and often in our lives, especially in a primary or significant relationship, eclipses our individuality. I people please so that you don't get mad at me. I people please. I cover up what I really feel so that you don't know my truth, so that I don't have to take a risk with you, so that we're on the same side all the time. But what happens is that's at the expense of one or both persons' autonomy. So I invite you to think about this activity, which comes under the umbrella of emotional intelligence. I invite you to think about this as a way of declaring your autonomy and a way of being together with the other person, together meaning engaged in trying to solve a problem, engaged in trying to understand where the other person is coming from. It's a mutual engagement that says we are separate, but we are in this together. I hope I'm being clear about that, because I think that's a very important point. Because when we conduct ourselves trying to merge almost with the other person, not trying to rock the boat, what happens is we're like, well, this is how I conceptualize it. We're almost two halves merging into one, rather than two whole people mixing it up. You know, um, even anger, when expressed in the spirit of trying to work something out, a relationship is perhaps important enough to one or both parties to get in there and risk discomfort. The 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 point of that really is that's an intimate exchange. Don't you think? It's a type of intimate exchange. I'm willing to let you see who I am, even if it gets rocky for a bit. But I'm going to present some strategies that I hope I adhere to much better next time, that can help you stay grounded if you remember to use them, and can help you express your anger, but maybe in a less angry way. I'll tell you what I mean in a little bit. I notice we have some people in the chat. Let me welcome all of you. Wayne, it's good to see you. Welcome. I'm going to take these in the order. Let's see. Oh, we have quite a few. Okay. Wayne, welcome. Glad you're here. Janine, welcome. If I express my truth to a close person in what I think is a responsible way, but am met with defensiveness and anger, I immediately feel, oh God, I blew it. Now we'll never recover. And I think you go on to say, but if we don't do the conversation, we'll never get closer. Quiet doesn't mean safety ultimately, only temporarily. Actually, Janine, I couldn't agree with you more. I have seen being silent and withdrawing, and then also giving the silent treatment, which is not just going silent. Giving the silent treatment is sort of one step beyond that. But I have seen more damage occur from being silent than I have from expressing anger. So I think that's a very important point. If we don't have the conversation, we'll never get closer, because you'll never get to the bottom. You'll never get to the bottom. So thank you for that. I'm going to elaborate on that after the break. Tony, good to see you. I think the three biggest contributors to unresolved conflict are ego, ignorance, and, for lack of a softer, kinder term, stupidity. regarding the matter at hand. Other factors, in my opinion, are attitude. Okay, 3 biggest contributors to unresolved conflict are ego. I'll agree with you there. Ignorance of a certain type. I'll agree with you there with a caveat. I think I'll elaborate on that later. And for lack of a softer, kinder term, stupidity regarding the matter at hand. Well, yes. Let me see if there are any other comments that I can spin off. Tony, I'm going to come back to that after the break. You're saying some interesting things there. Thank you. Dawn, these points are so important. Anger and conflict have gotten bad reputations. Yes, they have. Seen only as negative. People think it's confrontation, believing only one way to express anger or deal with conflict. Let me read that again, Dawn. These points are so important. Anger and conflict have gotten bad reputations. Yes. As Janine says, if the person gets defensive, then she feels she blew it and then may not know where to take it. Yes. Anger and conflict have a bad rap. People think it's confrontation, believing only one way to express anger or deal with conflict. I hope by the end of this conversation, I hope we can have other ways with which we can deal with conflict, keeping in mind this broader reframe that conflict, if we jump to slam doors and cursing and raised volume, if we can amend that a little bit to say conflict is a difference of opinion, perhaps a very deeply held opinion, a very meaningful opinion, an opinion to which we are incredibly attached, but a difference of opinion nonetheless. And what if we can hold out the possibility of being curious about what that other person is defending? What that other person is defending, because that reactivity that I spoke of, that I experienced myself, is really about trying to defend something, trying to protect something deep within. And I'll tell you this, and I'll leave it here before we go to the break. What we think we're fighting about, in fact, what we're sure we're fighting about, is 9 out of 10 times not at all what we're really fighting about. Those top level, those superficial things that we're fighting about, the dishes, the chores, the errands, the schedules, the finances, the parenting. Not that those are unimportant. Of course they're important, but that isn't usually at the root of the kinds of conversations we're talking about tonight. So let's hold it there, and let's digest all of this and stretch, take a break, have something to drink. When we come back, we'll continue with this conversation on the topic nobody likes to talk about, but all of us deal with, and that is confrontation. You're listening to Who Do You Think You Are? I'm your host, Catherine Duca, and I will be right back. Stay with me.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hefferland Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Kitchener, Unity Spiritual Center Ottawa, Om Center for Spiritual Living, Satya Center, Begin Within Ministries, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and the Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for being part of the New Thought Media Network. Please like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.
Well, hello there. This is Dr. Sydney Steen. I am the senior minister and spiritual leader of the North Hollywood Church of Religious Science. We are a oneness center for spiritual living. And I just want to invite you to something that I think is really, really special. In October, from the 6th to the 10th, at Unity Village in Lee Summit, Missouri, the affiliated New Thought Network will be hosting the most wonderful retreat. This will serve your soul. It will lift your heart. And oh my goodness, I want to call it an advance. So come hear wonderful speakers like Martha Creek, Sonny Cantrell, and the music will be off the hook with Ricky Byers. There will be so much there to support your soul. I hope that you will join us. You can go to antn.org. That's antn.org. You can get all the information. You can sign up. You can use a credit card, and it is safe and secure, and I hope to see you there. Have a blessed day.
What if the person you think you are is just a fraction of who you truly are? What if years of conditioning and surviving in a challenging world have left you clinging to strategies and beliefs that mask your truest nature? I'm Catherine Duca, psychotherapist and self-esteem coach, and you're listening to Who Do You Think You Are? A show that looks beneath our psychological masks and uncovers our profoundly messy, beautiful, brilliant, tender-hearted essence. Join me as we go in search of the hidden power of our true selves. I'm so glad you're here. And welcome back. If you're just joining me, we are talking about the topic of confrontation, a topic that most people, many people, I don't know most, but a good many, find very difficult and manage to shy away from, but then bear the consequences of doing that. You know, as Janine said before the break, if you hit a snag and the other person, you know, you think you've expressed yourself well and sincerely, and the other person becomes defensive, bristles, counter attacks, you can think easily to yourself, oh, I've blown it. I've blown it. Now what? I don't know how to get past this. Defensiveness is, it is, I won't say it's the hallmark. That's not the right word, but it's the most common occurrence in difficult conversations. And they can, you know, defensiveness, both yours and the other person's, can really stop the conversation in its tracks. But then, as Janine went on to say, then if you don't have the conversation, nothing gets resolved. So people are afraid. I find the people I speak to in my practice, they're afraid of confrontation because they came from a home. I mean, this happens quite often. They grew up in a home where there was uncontrollable arguing and fighting, where perhaps disagreements devolved into blow-ups. You know, people either gave the silent treatment or they punished someone in the family, or maybe you saw your parents fight and one of your parents, you know, stonewalled the other and maybe withdrew or retreated to the bedroom or slammed the doors or slammed the dishes, et cetera, you know? So there's good reason why so many of us are apprehensive about conflict. Chances are, if you grew up in a home where there was that kind of reaction to conflict, you may have said to yourself, taken a vow, I promise I am never going to become that sort of person. Well, I think you do one of two things, actually. You promise yourself you're never going to react like that, but you don't know of any other way. Therefore, you have no no recourse but to go silent, to go mute, because you don't want to emulate what you saw growing up, because it was harsh, because it was frightening, because it looked like things were out of control, or your parent or parents were out of control. So that's one reason why you might go silent. The other is because you might be expecting that the person you're talking with is going to react like that parent. So you're protecting your heart, you're protecting your feelings, you're protecting your nervous system by just trying not to rock the boat and trying to contain things. And sometimes defensiveness, though outwardly it looks like maybe a raised voice or, a flare up or something like that, inwardly, it may very well be conveying, I'm afraid something bad's going to happen here. And so I can't let that happen, because actually years ago, something bad did happen. You might have seen one parent take a swing at another parent, or walk out, slam the door, not come back for some period of time, hours, a day or two, or even longer than that. So when we have these memories imprinted in our minds and on our psyches, and in our emotional aura, it's hard not to expect them to be repeated, or it's hard not to repeat them yourself, even if you don't want to. Right. So one of the things we need to remember is that what we think we're fighting about, where to vacation, or, you want to stay in all the time, I want to go out, I want to go to dinner, you want to order in for the umpteenth time, you want to watch that show, I can't stand that show. You think you're fighting about that. And on the top level, on the surface level, oh yeah, of course you are. But really, what we fight most often about is power or control or respect. And questions that are underneath the things we say are, do I matter to you? Do I matter to you? Do you value me? Do you give a moment's thought to my experience? And the other person may be wondering the same thing. Do you give a moment's thought to mine? So I think it's very important that we understand that, this notion of how to manage conflict in our adult life, probably, and when I say probably, I mean most definitely, has a long trail to our younger years, our vulnerable years, when we saw conflict modeled for us by our parents, our caregivers, maybe even teachers. And we may have witnessed some very harsh things, and or we may have been on the receiving end of some harsh things. So when we say things like a certain kind of stupidity, as Tony was saying, or ego. Tony, you said one more thing. I can't remember what it was. Ego, ignorance, and stupidity. Well, I invite you to reframe that to, underneath an inflated ego is oftentimes insecurity. And what is insecurity? Insecurity is, I don't know if I can handle myself when there's an onslaught, when I perceive an onslaught coming toward me. So I puff myself up. I get defensive. I strengthen my armor. I'm ready to do battle to protect a vulnerable part of me. And in terms of ignorance, well, I think one of the things we so often do when we try to handle a conflict, I know I did this weekend, is we make assumptions. We make assumptions. We assume we know the person's intentions. We assume we have all the pieces of the puzzle and all of the information that is necessary to have a conversation like this. And oftentimes we don't. I think I would say, I think it's important sometimes to express your ignorance in the way of saying, listen, I'm not sure I know everything about where you're coming from right now. So you may want to say, can we just review how you think we got here? And I'm going to be quiet, even though this may be difficult for me. And if you've met me, you know that it can be. But I'm going to give you the room. And if I can find it in my heart, I welcome giving you the room, the opportunity to educate me on how you experienced this experience that we both went through, that I feel one way and you feel a completely different way. So I'm going to say that I might be ignorant and I'm asking to be educated. And I think what happens is, ego and protecting a vulnerability. Well, if we come on like gangbusters, if we are righteous, if we are so sure, there's that expression, often wrong, but never in doubt. I just know my perception is the way it happened. You're ridiculous to think it happened any other way. Well, right there, you're going to eclipse certainly goodwill, and you're going to invite the person to become defensive. So let me wrap up this point by saying we can't control how the other person reacts, of course, but what we can do with our words, with our behavior, with our insight, and our willingness to listen, what we can do is maybe influence the atmosphere so that the other person feels safer. Because when I puff myself up and I do all that, the other person would have to be made of steel to come toward me. So without realizing it, I may be pushing the other person away. And just because he or she gets louder doesn't mean they're not pushed away, doesn't mean I'm not losing them. Volume doesn't mean insight. Okay? So some interesting things to ponder. Now, let me just look at my note to be sure that I've said everything I want to say. Yeah, what are the things that we commonly argue about? All the examples. You're too lenient. You're too strict. You leave your dirty socks on the floor. Well, you're a neat freak. You have OCD. I mean, all that back and forth, back and forth. Underlying that is, I think, a kind of a plea. Hey, I'd like to think that my needs are at least important to you, even if you have another point of view, or you see another way you think you can meet my need, or tell me what you think of my needs to begin with. But I very much hope that I can speak to you in a way where you're willing to hear me and see me as I make that same effort and am willing to hear you and see you. So now, what to do, right? Everybody wants to know, what do I do instead? What do I do when the other person becomes defensive? What do I say? What do I do when my blood pressure, hits the roof and I just get so angry? What do I do? Well, before there is doing, there needs to be understanding. There needs to be understanding. And it begins with our own insight into ourselves. So, I invite everyone to put their therapist hat on and think about your own expectations when you feel conflict coming down the road. Your own expectations. Are you afraid that this will lead to rejection? Are you afraid and therefore anticipating that you're going to be abandoned in some way, shape, or form? And when I say abandoned, abandonment doesn't necessarily look like storming off. Abandonment we can feel abandoned when the other person deny, or when we do this to the other, denies what's being said, belittles what's being said, dismisses what's being said. And so we have to check our own expectations. And that's the only thing we can control, what goes on within us. So ask yourself deep down, when this discord happens, am I expecting a foregone conclusion? This is not going to go anywhere. I'm going to be left in the dust here by virtue of the other person dismissing me or poo-pooing what I have to say, because as I expect, I am likely to react. If that's what I think is going to happen, I'm going to be sort of cocked and loaded for that, because we all have an ego. And if our ego, Tony, it kind of gets the better of us, then we're going to be protecting our ego at all costs, rather than say, look, I know myself here. My feet are on the ground. Do a reality check. How likely is this to result? Because this person is not my mother. This person is not my father. And I may be viewing them through the lens of mother, father. So if I'm viewing them through my own lens of the person I remember exploded or abandoned me in some way, if that's my perception, then that person really doesn't have a chance. And that person will feel, trust me on this, they will feel that from us, and that will make them defensive. So I think it's a good idea to say, I could have used this past weekend. It seems to me that you're becoming defensive. Did I just say something, or did I say something in a way that's making you feel defensive? Tell me, because I'm not here to make you defensive. I'm here to understand what you're really trying to tell me. So I'm going to get curious. I'm going to acknowledge within myself that I know there's something underneath your defensive reaction, and I want to know what that is. And this comes under active listening and empathic attunement. Because if I just ping pong with what you're showing me and you do the same with what I'm showing you, then we're going to stall at the top level. And that ping pong is going to go on and on and on. But if I can throw the first card and say, look, I don't want you to be defensive. What did I just say? Or how did I say it? Please let me know so that I can correct myself, so that I can ask you in a different way. Clarification questions. Okay, so what I hear you saying is this. Am I correct? I've talked about this before. What I hear you saying is, am I correct? Okay. May I ask you one more question about that? Okay. I'm asking to be educated. I'm asking you to work with me so that neither of us allows my knee jerk. I mean, I'm ultimately in control of that. But if I can ask you a question in that way, and if you can answer me, then I think our shoulders might come down a little bit, and we might be communicating on a different level. Are you with me? Let me just check and see. Okay. Okay, Wayne says, safe space for light workers. Wayne, it's all about safety. It's all about creating a safe space. And actually, it is up to us to go first, right? It's so easy to want the other person to go first. So we want to watch our language. We want to watch our expectations. We want to monitor any catastrophic thinking that may be going on. You know, I know what happened when my mother or father had an argument, and I bet this is going to go the same way. Watch your own conditioning, because that could be at play. How are we doing on time? Okay. I think that it is time to bring this to a close by saying, have as your underpinning and understanding that we are not afraid of conflict out of the blue for no reason. It is not because we're not sophisticated beings. It's because we're human beings. And somewhere along the line, we were probably trained by virtue of what we observed or what we experienced to be afraid of conflict. It's not going to end well. So if nothing else tonight, if you can leave this conversation and go out into the world and say, maybe that's my own deal. Maybe that's what I walk around with. Maybe I never quite identified it for myself, but I expect the wheels to come off at the slightest note of disharmony. And when someone else gets defensive, I take that as a sure sign that this is going to go off the rails. And then I abdicate. I stop talking. I go blank. Well, understandable, but that can also be an opportunity to do the counterintuitive thing and lean in and say, not my intention. Or you can say, I feel myself becoming defensive and I don't want to react from this place. Can you phrase what you just said a little differently? Because I might hear it. I might hear it differently. It sounds like you think when I was late, or when I wanted to do this and you wanted to do that, or when I didn't, address that question before. What I'm hearing is that felt to you like I didn't value your time. And while that isn't what I feel inside, I think I could see how you might have taken it that way. And I acknowledge that. And then if you feel like you want to apologize sincerely, I'm sorry that I didn't realize that when we had the conversation before, but I realize it now. I'd like to have a redo, or I want you to know that I consciously intend to do better next time. I'm going to remember what you're telling me now, and I'm going to carry that with me. Because, dear listeners, as I say, no matter the topic, the crux of the crux of the crux of the issue is, we all carry some remnant of an early wound in this human experience, And we have built and erected layer upon layer of armor, character armor, defensiveness, protection, masks. And we all walk around mask to mask. But I hope, and it is my intention, and I'm listening carefully to myself, by the way, that as we go about our business this week, we hold that. We keep that top of mind. The person who was snarky, the person who reacted abruptly, the person who didn't look at us when we looked at them, let's give them, we talk about grace, let's give them some grace, which is to say, let's afford them our knowledge that, things probably happened to them just as things likely happened to us. Because I think if we do that, we will be more gentle people, softer people. And that can only help things. There's a time and a place to defend ourselves. And there are probably many more times and places in which to be gentle and invite deeper communication and deeper understanding. So, dear listeners, wide receivers, let's take this into our week. We're all doing our best. Until next time, thank you so much for your contributions. Know that you are not only loved, you are love. You are love. You have divine essence within you. You are the embodiment of divine essence. You are, I am. Let's take that on the road. Take good care. Be well. I love you all. I'll see you next time. Good night.